All right. Hello, everyone. Yes, so the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking about a hotly debated topic, improving Blender's interface. So, show of hands, who saw my proposal video that went up? Yeah. Wow, that's almost everyone. Okay. Fantastic. All right. Well, at the time that the proposal went up, I thought it was the cat's pajamas. I thought it was amazing. I thought, this is what Blender needs. We need this proposal. This is how Blender should look. Since then, I've learned many new things, and I've learned some of the problems, the key problems with the proposal. I've spoken with some developers. I've read some of the feedback from the users, and I've also spoken with a real UX software designer who happily pointed out some of the flaws in the proposal. So this presentation over the next 30 minutes is going to be a reflection on the proposal of the good and the bad, and ways that we can move forward. So let me just grab the mouse. I have to use this. Okay. So first thing a lot of people ask me is, why? Why did I bother stepping into this whole mess? It's not something that I've ever done before. It's not something that I'm really even experienced in. So why on earth did I ever get started in it? Well, the reason I got started in it was I got hooked on a book. Started reading a user design book, talking about usability and things like that. And I got really interested in it. I started reading a bunch more. And one of the key themes of these books was that businesses have failed due to tiny usability errors in their software. When internet banking first came out, there were a whole bunch of banks that introduced this new internet banking infrastructure into their system, and they lost heaps of customers due to the fact that people could not use the internet banking, and so they switched to somebody who had a more usable interface for them to work with. That's just one example. There's been countless others, companies losing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on an idea that worked out well, but then usability, it just failed. So I started to think, what about Blender? Blender's reputation for its usability is famously not that great. I think we can all agree. We've read some things from other users that don't use it, and it's a little hard to wrap your head around it. And so I thought, how does this apply to Blender? Because if this is costing companies dearly, then it could also do the same thing for Blender. And to check up on this, I started a thread on CG Society. I'm not sure if any of you actually read it, but it was called, "Why Don't You Use Blender?" A serious discussion. And I wanted to open the floor to rejections. I wanted to see why people weren't using Blender. Because regardless of how critical some people can be, I find that rejections always reveal some form of truth. And listening to them, although it's painful, it can actually be beneficial. So I launched the thread. It blew up to be 20 pages long. And I think a few Blender users found it, and they tried to go in there and defend it, which was not what I planned, but anyways. And these are some of the reasons. I'm going to show you them now. They're not pleasant, but these are some of the real reasons, actual quotes from people as to why they're not using Blender. So as a sort of a summary, sharp learning curve, anti-UX conventions, learning Blender feels like a hazing process, and people aren't able to get in the front door to discover how good its functionality is because it's too hard to use. So something big and bold needs to happen if it wants to step up in a major way. So this really sparked my attention, and I came up, well, I thought to myself, if we could create a better interface, one that was more inviting to new people, and as a result of that, we could get more users overall. And then as a result of more users, you could get more donations in the future. Not short term, but down the line, 2 or 3 years, if we had double the user base, you could imagine, roughly speaking, it would be double the donations, roughly, right? And then, as a result of that, you could get more development, more full-time developers that are actually working for the Blender Institute. And then as a result of that, you get a better Blender. So, sounds like a really oversimplified process, but that's essentially the business model for most open source projects that rely on donations. So, that is why I thought this idea of improving the Blender's interface was a worthwhile endeavor. So I decided to get serious about it. So this is where I started to write notes. As I was reading these books, I started to jot down notes on things that apply to Blender. Some of the things that are really a problem. Some of the things that, the basic laws of usability and how Blender is breaking these laws. And then from there, I put them down into 2 videos, which started the campaign. So I originally called these videos Fixing Blender, Why It's Broken, and in hindsight realized that was a really mean title, one that really didn't start it off on the right foot with developers, that's for sure. And so I renamed it Improving Blender. And so that was to start it off, really to get sort of awareness, to ask people to think about how Blender could be improved overall into the future. So then after that, I started to write down some concepts, sketching out some ideas on how, how the interface could look, how it could be improved according to the ideas and, the things that I'd read in books. This was just sort of sketching things out. And then from there, since I didn't want to be one of those people that just sat there and just mocked Blender and then didn't come up with any solution as to, how to fix this, I decided to create a proposal. And that's where the problem started. So, the proposal video that you've all seen basically introduced a whole bunch of new concepts. Big header at the top, tabs, a sidebar, and very overall, big shock to the system. But I thought this would be great for new users, And it introduced new ways of doing things, such as how to add materials. You could have presets, you could do all this cool stuff. The rendering process, having a progress bar and an approximate time remaining. Little ideas like this. And then, of course, the post-processing stage, you could have, drag down little, common special effects that you'd be adding. And just to overall make the stepping stones to get into Blender more inviting and eventually get people more hooked on Blender in the long run. So, problem with that is that over time, the Blender community caught on. And there was quite a lot to say. Pretty much the Blender Artist forums have been pretty much unapproachable for the last couple of weeks, I would say. I went and had a look through them before coming here, and it was not pretty. I actually, just as for the sake of curiosity, decided to do a count on all the threads. So there's 856 posts on Blender Artists, 1,240 on my site, 919 on Blender Nation, 3,913 on YouTube, and then 177 on other forums, coming down to a grand total of 7,105 reactions. Now, this isn't anything to be impressed about. I'm not saying this as a badge of honor, especially seeing as probably about half of those were people that were against it. Some of those were personal insults directed at me. So it's not a badge of honor, but I say this to point out to the fact that what we already know is that the Blender community really does care about its interface. And I learned later on that the reason for that, and this is the reason for pretty much any software, when somebody has spent the time to learn a new piece of software, when somebody suggests a change and a complete rewrite of not a rewrite, but a new skin for the interface, something like that, it's basically asking people to destroy their investment and start over, which of course nobody wants to do. They've spent time, hours learning a new piece of software. So introducing a new thing obviously results in a lot of feedback. So I think, hang on. Bastian sort of summed it up quite well with this tweet. That's pretty much how I felt over it as well. Is Sebastian here? Is Sebastian here? Yeah? Yeah, there he is, way at the back, yeah. That was a good one. Okay, so I predicted this would happen. I knew there would be a huge amount of comments and no clear voice, nobody to actually listen to. You scroll through the comments and you listen to one person, you go, oh, that guy's got some good points, and then the next guy, and you go, that guy's got some good points that conflict with the other guy, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And there's no way to actually figure out, what's the overall impression of something. So I put together a survey. Thought a survey would be a novel idea. And so one of the points of the survey was to ask, basically what parts of the proposal did you like and which parts didn't you like, just to get a sort of overall impression. And these were the results of that. So starting from the top, the most liked, and then down to the bottom with the least liked. So you've got the top, cleaner look, tabs, layer panels, typical stuff. And then of course, a cliff down to the big buttons, which of course makes sense. Everybody likes those huge, gigantic buttons. And I knew that when I made it, but I did it anyway. So another question that I asked was to get the overall feel. What did you think of it? On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I hate absolutely everything, and 10 being I absolutely love everything. And these were the results, surprisingly enough. It was quite positive. And overall, if you got the mean average of that, this was out of 2,000 votes, by the way, 2,000 people. The mean average of those votes was 8.7 out of 10. So I thought, this is great. Everybody loves it. This is the way to do it. This is how we go ahead. Until, about 3 days ago, I spoke with a UX software designer called Duncan McNeil. So he has 7 years experience doing exactly this, designing interfaces for software companies. So he goes in there, talks to the client, finds out what the software is used for, and then tries to come up with a concept to improve the usability of that software. And so I had the pleasure of talking with him for 2 hours. Has anyone listened to that podcast, by the way? Yeah? A few people, cool. Really insightful stuff, and it basically knocked the wind out of my sails because he made a lot of sense, and he pointed out some key flaws with the proposal, and as well as that, he mentioned something which really kicked me back. Usability polls rarely represent accurate data, as people will always vote in favor of ease of use over flexibility. And of course, when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Because when you see a user interface, you look at all the easiness of it. You see the big, clean buttons, and you go, wow, wouldn't that be just easy to use? I vote yes. And that is a problem, because they do not think about the flexibility. So, that means all of this, waste of time, doesn't mean anything. Just get a drink, sorry. So yeah, so that was a big waste of time, and it wasn't good. So, as well as that, I learned from talking with various people, as well as talking to Duncan, I learned some of the key proposal problems. Biggest one is inflexibility. So I introduced the concept of tabs and having your tools all along the top. That was the main point of it, so that when you're working on a task, you can have all the tools that you want available for that task. Sounds great. But the problem is that it's not as simple as that. So in my examples, I showed really basic scenes. So when you look at this, you go, yeah, if I was working on that cube, pretty cool if I could just, you know, drag down some of those things. I want a sphere, that'd be kind of cool, you know? But then you don't think about in the future, you might be working on a character animation where you have an audio track and then you also have an animation. So you might want to have the video sequencer over there with all your audio, and then you might want to also have, you know, the animation tools as well. And with my current design, even though it allowed for split screens, I didn't show that in the proposal, but that was the plan, you wouldn't be able to have 2 tool sets shown at the exact same time. So huge problem with the proposal, and basically means the tabs aren't really going to work. So another proposal, lack of vertical space, mainly due to that gigantic toolbar at the top there. Having horizontal layouts, they do work good because it reduces the need for scrolling, basically cuts that out entirely, so that's a good thing. But as a result of that, you get an extremely widescreen view of your scene, which I guess we all learned from 2.4, right? Which is why we went with the vertical layout. But as a result of that, we now have a lot of scrolling. So what do? I decided to go for the header, but something else to think about, the lack of vertical space. Tab overkill. Basically, I made a tab for every single task. There was tabs in there for weight painting and all sorts of different things like that. Little tiny task having a tab, and having that all laid out across your header there would be problematic because it's just going to fill up the whole thing, and there's no real structure to it. So having some sort of grouping, that would have been a lot better, but that obviously wasn't in the proposal. Other problems, the predictive menus. This one was really interesting to hear about. So as you might remember in the proposal, I suggested the concept of, so say you have 2 edge loops selected, and they both have an equal amount of vertices. if you right-clicked, you could have Blender predict that you want to create a bridge, because that's the common function that you would do if you selected those two edge loops. But the problem with that is that what if you had two edge loops selected and one of them had one less vertice than the other? You click right-click, that option is not there. So to the user, you'll be jumping up and down, going, where is that option that I've always seen there before? And there will be no help for them. There will be no sort of idea as to why that menu hasn't appeared. So predictive menus wouldn't work. The other reason it wouldn't work is that when people are working in an autonomous environment, basically, once you've been using software, what was that? Hello? Okay. Once you've been using software for a long enough time, you want to get to the stage where you're able to use it autonomously. That's what UX software designers say is like the ideal state, where you can just sit there and without thinking about it, just work, and get the job done and finished. So the autonomous state is is what you should be pursuing. Having predictive menus would actually cause problems with that, because when you're working autonomously, and let's say you have a right-click menu that drops down and there's like a subdivide, something like that, you would know in your head that the third option down is subdivide. You wouldn't actually be reading it. After you've been using the software for long enough, you know that the third one down from the top is subdivide. If you suddenly introduce predictive menus for that, suddenly you'd be clicking on the wrong thing because the orders would change. So a predictive menu in that sense would not work. So that's something I did not consider, but it makes a lot of sense now. There was also a lot of poorly explained concepts I never introduced, never talked about split screening. I didn't talk about a lot of different things. I didn't mention the fact that the sidebar could include an outliner. A lot of people said, why isn't the outliner in the sidebar? I thought, well, you could do it. I just didn't put it in the proposal. So there were some poorly explained concepts. Preset problems. Presets are great. Material presets in particular. Pretty much every 3D software today has them. But when talking about presets, you also need to consider the fact that when new users approach a software and they get hooked on presets, if the presets don't explain clearly how that thing was created, so even in the case of a wooden material, if the preset basically just, you click it, wooden material appears and you're all happy, that's great for the new user, but over time, that new user will not have learned how that wooden material was created. So it's not good for learning, which is a very critical point. So presets can be done, but it needs careful consideration as to how to implement that. Another one was that I presented a full mock-up. And this is not a good idea, believe it or not. Full mock-ups distract people from the overall big picture. Because when you're having a full mock-up, people get distracted by little tiny things. They get distracted by the color of a button. They get distracted by how big a button is. They get distracted by, why is that icon up there? Why is this there? Why is that there? So it's actually bad. Full mock-ups aren't good. I thought it'd be great. That's what everybody needs. You want, Photoshop, open that up and get started. That's how you do it. But it doesn't give people a good idea of the big picture, which is why actual UX software designers, when they're designing interfaces and they're showing them to clients, they actually use hand-drawn sketches. Because hand-drawn sketches gives people a much better idea of the overall structure and layout of the software, and they don't have to rely on, actually, what was I going to say? Can't remember. But anyways, it just gives people a better idea of the overall software. So full mock-ups, actually, not a good idea. So those are the 6 or 7? 7 big problems with my proposal. Out of that, though, there was a few salvageable concepts, something that could possibly work. So the usability standards that I mentioned in the part 1 and part 2, those stand for pretty much every single software out there. So consistency, that's one that, I've spoken with numerous people yesterday and today, and pretty much every single person said consistency. That's something they really want fixed. Those concepts apply to everything, and they definitely should apply to Blender as well. As well as that, tool grouping. So tool grouping is very important. I presented it with tabs, but tabs may not necessarily be the best solution, but tool grouping should happen because, as I demonstrated, if you're working on sculpting, you've got all the different tools spread out all over the place, and it's very difficult to work autonomously because you have to open up this, open up that. You're losing screen space and it's closing in, and it becomes problematic. The sidebar features, they can work. The notifications, thing like that, as opposed to the dialog boxes or the little things flashing up onto the cursor. Some things like that are layer panels, as well as a history manager to also helps new users to understand the past actions that they've taken, which is very good. And then as well as that, feedback, so general overall feedback of the software when you click something that actually feeds back that you've clicked it. When you're dragging something, it doesn't lag behind the cursor when it's too high poly. You can make it so that it's low poly as you drag it. Little things like that can be applied. And mouse functionality, right-click menus could work, but they obviously, all the options there need to remain exactly as they are. They can't shift or change depending on, a predictive, whatever you're doing. So if something is not available for the task that you're doing, it should be grayed out. Something I read in a book, but I didn't even think about when I was making this, is that they say that you should never ever make an option vanish from a user interface, because when something vanishes, it confuses users and they wonder, where did that thing go? So it should always gray out and never actually vanish. And then as well as that, there is the possible option of a left-click default, going by the UX standards and conventions that people are used to. Remembering, of course, the feedback from the CG Society, that was, of course, the big one that people said. However, Duncan mentioned that if we go with the left-click default, which he recommends, that the current users be given the explicit instructions on how to change it back to the right-click menu if they want it. So you could call it like legacy mode or something like that, because existing users know about the user preferences panel. They know how to access little settings like that, but new users don't. So in favor of new users, in favor of getting new people on board, a left click would definitely be a good idea, but existing users need to know how to change it back should they like it. So to summarize, the proposal had lots of eye candy, made everybody very happy. It was beginner heavy, which is good for beginners, which is why a lot of people on YouTube and things like that loved it, because they're beginners. And it was inflexible, so serious problems when you want to do multiple tasks at the exact same time. It was overly ambitious, so I mentioned a lot of things which I thought would sound very simple to do, but then after talking with developers, find out it's probably going to take like a couple of years, a couple of developers working full time. It's going to add up, so very overly ambitious. Very short-sighted of me to make these huge suggestions, because now the Blender community is expecting them to happen, which is not good. And overall, there's a couple of doable ideas. So that was the big problem with the proposal, and that's why it didn't really work. But talking about moving forward, so a lot of people agree that, I think pretty much everybody would agree, that the UI and the usability of Blender could improve in some way, some form or fashion. So how can that be done? Well, something that Ton has already mentioned. A UI team, hey. So this is something that, after talking with Duncan, the software designer, he said this is paramount to designing software, that you have a team of people that has absolute control over the user interface. Democracy-based systems very, very rarely ever work well, because everybody giving their opinions and everybody, developers listening to those opinions very, very rarely ever works out well. So a fully educated UI team that has full control is much better than it is currently, where it's community-based sort of things like that. So having a close-knit team with full control, they can bridge the gap between users and developers, and that's basically one of the things that needs to happen, in that there's a lot of users with a couple of ideas, but understandably, developers are very busy. If you had a UI team that could understand the developer side as well as the user side, they can bridge that gap. Somewhat UX experienced, ideally. This is just stuff that I learned from talking with Duncan and things like that. Having somewhat UX experience would definitely help for this UI team. And a big one, they should be unbiased. And this is a really big one, because pretty much everybody has a bias. A beginner has a bias because they want things to be easy. An advanced user has a bias because they want things to be flexible. Everybody has a bias. As well as that, developers have a bias. This is a quote from a book, which I think is very paramount. The goals of the programmer and the goals of the user are dramatically different. The programmer wants the construction process to be smooth and easy. The user wants the interaction with the program to be smooth and easy. These two objectives almost never result in the same program. Hence why having a UI team which is separate to both the user group as well as the developer group is key. So we have a large community, and I'm sure that there are people out there with UX experience. After I put out a call on Facebook, I got numerous emails coming back from people that have UX experience, and I'm sure if we gave them the opportunity, they could possibly help out with this. And basically, the idea being that currently we have users on one side in their separate world, and then we have developers on their side in IRC in their separate world. And basically at the moment, if a user has an idea like, For example, we were talking over dinner yesterday, the fact that, deleting an image in the UV image editor doesn't actually delete it from your scene, You have to hold down Shift and delete, which of course nobody really knows, but that's how it works. And so if somebody had this idea and they wanted to tell it to a developer, if you're a nobody, then if you try and send it to a developer, it doesn't work. Because understandably, developers are very, very busy people and they're already working hard on things. And having one idea sent from one user, I mean, who's to know if that user is actually making any sense or not? So the point of a UI team basically is to bridge the gap. Users can approach the UI team with ideas, and the UI team can assess those ideas and talk amongst them themselves, and then pass that on to the developers. So this is ideas, of course. And of course, not to tell anybody how to suck eggs, but this is ideas for the future on how the UI team could be assembled and how they could work. This is based on feedback from Duncan and things like that. To tackle the low-hanging fruit first, there's a lot of tiny little things in Blender which could be handled and approached, and they would basically get the community on board with, hey, this team actually knows what they're doing, and look at all these little improvements that they're making, and now Blender is easier to use. So that low-hanging fruit is actually really fundamental before any big change ever happens. If it does, the low-hanging fruit, the easy stuff, should definitely be tackled first. Then they would basically, the idea is they should be posting hand-drawn UI designs to the community. Of course, going back to what I said before, full mock-ups not being a good idea as they distract people from the overall view. There's actually software and websites out there that will actually do this for you. So you can draw out something like that and they'll make it look hand-drawn. There's one called Balsamic and another one called Azure, which are very good, so they could be used as that. And listen to feedback from the community. And this is very important as well. You'd think that listening to feedback is a really bad idea because the amount of comments, but it's actually really fundamental. Users are the ones that are going to be using this software. So of course, we need to listen to those users because they're the ones that are using it. So listening to the feedback and then being able to filter the feedback based on its validity. So basically there are 7 different types of validity, the lowest one being face value. So if somebody says like, I don't like that because it looks too much like Modo, or I don't like that, it looks like 3ds Max, or I don't like the color of that button, that sort of comment can be ignored pretty much because all it is based off face value. Somebody coming in there, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. Like, I don't like it, It's terrible. So you can just ignore stuff like that. But then going down, content-wise, if somebody has an objection to something based on their workflow and they're talking about the content of that, then that should be higher up and people should be able to filter out that feedback to find the key idea. And then, of course, they could send those ideas to the developers down the line, and that is it. So that's some possible ideas for the future. So I wanted to sort of iron out the key concerns that a lot of people here had, and as well as address the people that were in favor of the proposal and those that are against it. And yeah, and as well as that, to anybody that's going forward, they can learn from my numerous mistakes and hopefully go about it in a better manner. So thank you very much for listening. So we have a few minutes for questions. So if anybody has some questions or ideas that they want to raise, we have a man, the Aussie in the back there. Do we have another microphone so that he's on the camera, or?
Don't worry, I'm
Is one? Oh, can I use that?
I can go and do the audio.
Microphone. Okay. All right, Andrew Buttery, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello. Cool.
Yep.
Everybody in this room, I think, is probably a pretty experienced Blender user, and a lot of assumptions seem to be made about beginner Blender users. Has anyone done any research into that? Because from my experience, I had one student who couldn't get past the splash screen because they couldn't find the OK button.
Yeah. Usability testing it's something that big software companies do. It's expensive to do. Basically, they put this subject in a room and they stand behind this two-way mirrored glass and they watch the subject. Somebody stands behind them with a clipboard and says, do this thing. And then the developers sit behind the glass and they just sit there and go, why are they doing that? Why are they behaving like this? Because from somebody who's developed the software or somebody that's used to the software, you can have an assumption, like the user, they can get past the splash screen, it's no problem. But then when you watch a user do it, they can often highlight a lot of really key areas which we just don't know about because we've never done usability testing before. Which is something I wanted to bring up. If the foundation was open to it, I'd gladly sponsor a usability company to actually do some usability testing on Blender, and we could have a much better idea of the key problems with it. But it's open, of course. Right. Anyone else with another question? This man down here in the front.
Thank you. I don't know if I count as a newbie or not. I've only got about 12 months elapsed time experience with Blender. My experience as a beginner wasn't that Blender was difficult. I mean, I grew up doing YouTube tutorials. That's where I started. And I think it's unreasonable to assume that somebody is going to sit down in front of Blender thinking, oh, that's pretty, what do I do now? I mean, the beginners these days understand the idea of, look, if I don't know how to start, I'll Google it. That's the beginner mindset, or at least that was my beginner mindset. And what worried me most about your proposal was the idea that you are treating the beginner as a dummy. They're ignorant, but they're not stupid. And I think the consistency model you've got is exactly right. But I think you would actually put off most beginners who'll go, this looks like a toy application. I don't mind Blender looking complicated so long as there's a reward for my effort in learning it.
Yeah. So the concern being, of course, that, yeah, it's too dumbed down. I did some research on that, on how many people actually, you know, when they're learning a piece of software. There was a computer science company that investigated, you know, how dumb are users really? No. They investigated how people actually learn software. And the first thing that people do when they're coming to a new piece of software is they try to figure it out themselves. They try to dive in and try to figure it out. That is the number one way that people approach a problem. If they don't get past that, they either quit or they go to number two, which is to ask somebody else, which is why classroom environments work very well. If you have a teacher standing there physically in front of the classroom, students very rarely feel like fearful and inundated with all this new stuff because there's a teacher right there, you can just ask the teacher. And then the third way after that down the line is to then ask for online help, which is when you go to Google. So that's the third option down there. And it is true that you know, a lot of new people do go to Google, but then there's a lot of new people as well that if they can't get anywhere with the software and they find that they just can't make any progress at all, then they might think, it's not really worth my time. I spoke with one person who said that, you know, if I can't click on anything, then how much harder is everything else going to be? This software just isn't for me. And I'm sure we've all encountered that as well. If you've ever downloaded any other minor software, 3D software applications and things like that, some of them have completely crazy interfaces where you see something in front of you and you try and click and drag it around or something, but it's like the wrong panel you're supposed to be clicking on and it's one over here. And so you would think that person obviously goes to Google to figure out how to use that program. I didn't. Just because the software didn't give me any reward to start off with, to say that you're making progress, this is something that you should continue to do. It just wasn't making any progress at all, and then people give up. So yes, a lot of people do go to Google, and then a lot of people do quit as well, but we don't know the statistics on that. So that's basically it, so yeah.
Sometimes new users are incredibly smart in point out the little fruits that can be taken with no effort by developers. I mean, some questions of the students. I have 60 students that I'm teaching. Right click, left click. Some rotate. And some students point out user interface problems that are so easy to solve, and when you see that is looking something there, you open your mind and you say, yeah, this is obvious that it should be there. So I think that one thing that can be used to analyze the current user interface is these teaching newbie lessons. And another cool stuff that can be done is eye tracking session. So you put a user and you say, you have to do this. And there is a little webcam that points out where you are looking and where you are searching the tools in the interface. It's quite expensive to do this test, but you also can look how the concentration of the people is and how emotionally is involved about how much is big the pupil while you are working. So this can be done. And stop. This is.
So you're saying basically with that usability testing, we could find out where the new users are actually looking and figuring out how they behave. It's one way. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So that's definitely an option. And it's those sort of things that we just don't know. We all have assumptions on how new users will approach a piece of software. And often, as basically every usability book that I've read, pretty much everybody gets it wrong. When new users approach a piece of software by themselves with no help, they start doing crazy things. I remember once, my first time I ever actually taught somebody to use Blender was back in high school. I'd only been using Blender for a couple of years, and I had a classroom of people there, and I was giving them a tutorial on how to create a fireworks system or something. And the first thing I wanted them to do was to hit Shift-A and then add in a plane. And the problem is that when people hit Shift-A, they saw the option for monkey. Half the class clicked monkey. And they didn't know how to get rid of it. They didn't know how to go back. And so I had to go around individually to each computer, delete their monkey, delete the monkey, delete the monkey. We didn't get anywhere. Nobody made the actual finished result because I overestimated basically a beginner's ability to create something simple. And so that's an example, We think that people would do what you'd say, but monkey, I gotta click it. All right, next question. Then we've got time for about 3 or 4 more, yeah?
My topic, the thing that surprises me most, although I know it a little bit, I think because we are growing probably, is the perception that there is some kind of separation between the users on one hand and the people who are making Blender. There's some kind of invisible place where you can't talk to them. And in my role as chairman of the Blender Foundation and the way how I've been organizing the projects, I've always tried to get the user central. Every developer gets kicked by me continuously if they do anything that even smells like making their lives easier and making users' life more difficult. And since 2005, we do open movie projects, always getting the best of the users there and make them work together, together with the developers to make something. And that's how we did animation stuff, that's how we got the fluid stuff, how we got the rendering stuff. There's a load of advanced features in Blender that are not added only by technical people, but that have been shaped by the users. That's why the animation system in Blender is so good. It's not a coder's thing. It has been worked on with coders working together with the animators. So your drawing of the UI team, it suggests as if we need a communication. And I would totally object against that. We don't need to do that kind of central communication. I want to have it decentralized. The riggers have to talk to the rigging coders. But the interface designers, of course we need them, but they talk about layout, configuring the interface, panels, buttons, that kind of stuff. But you also have modeling, we have game making in Blender. We have so many things in Blender, and at every level is interface. So modeling, like Jonathan Williamson, he's working with modeling coders. Motion tracking, we have users working with the motion tracking in Blender. For rendering, shading, node systems, etc. We have all these communications going on. So why did you not feel that. You don't feel like as if it was available for you to connect or so. As if it was on a distance. Because I thought we had like hundreds of people involved, and it was quite open for people to get access.
I guess you're talking about that one? Yeah, that's one Thomas said was a mean graphic. Basically, yes, I'm aware of the module teams that are happening, and Jonathan Williamson working with the modelings and things like that. This was just in regards to a UI team and something like that, just usability-wise. So if somebody had a problem with, as I mentioned before, the fact that when you click on the delete button, it doesn't delete an actual image. You have to hit Shift Delete. That's a usability central problem, which I think we currently don't have any modules for. And also in regards to the users not being able to reach the developers, that's more, it's reflective, I think, on the fact that personally I found it difficult to get in contact with developers because I don't want to inconvenience them by sending them a direct email. And I think we can all agree with that. Like, nobody wants to get an angry email back from a developer saying, post this on Blender Hours or something like that. I don't want to inconvenience somebody. And IRC is a very, it's a very sort of, it's a concept that a lot of people aren't really, I think, up to, and they're not really into. So I find that, yeah, that's the reason there's a bit of a disconnect, I think.
Well, I agree, we have to be ensuring that this communication works, and also that the team's profile, what you said, the UI team, if you have people who have a known name, like we had Matt App helping on the interface, he was available online, he was talking to Blender artists, he was doing website stuff, great articles about usability. If that person is in charge of Blender interface stuff, which he was for 2.5, then it communicates well.
Yeah.
So we need to find those people, I know. Mm-hmm. But still, it would be good to emphasize that trust level, because we do have really good people on board working on Blender. They are world-class people. We also have people who understand interface design. There's people with many years of interface design experience on board, which you could also ask. And so going to other people, I mean, interface design is like politics, you can find opinions. So design is always based on first narrowing down and say, this is what we want, this is where we go to, and this is what we try to do. Then you make an interface. Mm-hmm. And for every design, you can make different ones. Mm-hmm. So, anyway.
I'm using Blender for 2 years, and I'm teaching at the university for the students, but besides also for children and for seniors, like really old people who just only use the computer for internet, but they want to use Blender. And I saw that most people, both professionals or students who are used for with other 3D programs, and also the people who don't work professional at all, are used to work with one hand, just with the mouse. And I saw the interface you proposed is mostly focused on mouse interaction, like taking this preassumption of using the mouse is easier. But I think it's both healthier to use both hands, because we will use the both brain halves, and also for the shoulders, it's much more healthier. I will really to keep that from beginning on. Just it's not kind of forcing the starters to use both hands, but it's easier. If the hurdle, I noticed also by the beginners, there's a small hurdle to put the left hand on the keyboard that stays there, but it's after the second or third lecture, it's everybody's used and everybody's really working faster than like using one hand. And yes, I think the interface is on the table on the Blender, like on the keyboard and on the mouse, that it should maybe don't take much place on the screen. That's my...
So you're saying that the keyboard, a lot of new users aren't used to using the keyboard and they're stuck with the mouse? Yeah, I think that's fairly common for again, assumption, fairly common for a lot of software applications. The big thing that a lot of other software applications do, though, is that they have the main tools on display. Like, as an example, Photoshop. If you hover over a tool, you can click on the tool, and that's great. But you also, if you use that tool many times, you might go, I'm clicking that tool a lot, hover over it, and it says hotkey is M. And that's gradually, over time, you learn how to get faster with the software because you learn the key presses and the little key functions and things like that. And that's when you start to use the keyboard. But I agree, when new users start out, it's mainly mouse-based functions. I think that's agreeable, yeah.
The last one, because the lunch has been served 30 minutes ago, and then we can have food, and this discussion can go on all conference.
Thanks. I think I've took away the microphone from one person down there who's waving all the time already. But now I have it, and I won't give it back. I just wanted to... Okay, I will. I will talk to you later anyway.
The waving guy. Okay, yeah, the waving.
Oh, thank you.
That's very nice, Sebastian.
Sebastian, thank you. I would like also ask you, what you have a question. What question do you have for Andrew? But next time maybe. Andrew, this is maybe a bit personal question, but I would like to ask you, what are your future plans? What will be your next step in this situation you created here? Okay, that's all.
Next plan? Well, I mean, I've been doing the tutorials for 4 years and stuff, and after a while it does sort of feel like just doing the same tutorials over and over again, you know? And I really wanted to try to have a break and try and do something positive that would affect Blender long term. Because, I mean, ideally, I am a businessman, I am running a business, and basically my livelihood survives off Blender, really, it does. And so, let's get rid of that graphic. So I really wanted to, when I discovered that, these glaring issues that, a lot of people have with Blender and things like that, I started to wonder, is sticking with Blender the best solution long term? Like in 10 years from now, is it actually a worthwhile endeavor to stay with Blender? And so that's when I started to think about the usability and thinking, is Blender going to be successful in the future? Is it going to, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the user base is slowly going up, but I began to wonder, are we going in the right direction? So I really wanted to have a sort of a say in that, some sort of way to guide it or something like that. As opposed to my earliest statement where I said that I wasn't going to do any more tutorials until I fixed this interface. That was a very bold statement, I think. That's one of my short-sightedness and my naivety, thinking that the interface could be fixed so simply. I'd go back on that statement. So I would go back to making tutorials. But ideally, I would like to, if anybody was interested, of course, like talking more about the usability and, talking with the UI team about various little things, but I don't know if people want me anymore, if I beat this horse enough. That was basically why I did it, but yeah.